There is something of a problem with modern movies and television shows. And that problem is that everything's been done. And it's been done to the point that now there are things in every type of television show, every genre, that whatever is going to happen, you can almost set your watch to what's going to happen next. All of them fall into the same formulas, the same ideas. There's nothing new under the sun. Heaven forbid that writers, directors, all those people who make millions of dollars dare to come up with something new. It'd be nice if they did. But it's moved on from the point of formulaic to being just what I call the moldy oldies. Like, take, for example, every detective series that you watch, you can practically map out the entire episode before it ever hits your TV screen, right? We're talking shows like Law & Order, CSI, NCIS, AARP, whichever one is your favorite. They do have a target audience. But there's going to be a setup at the very beginning of that episode that's going to give you a brief glimpse either into the life of the victim or into the life of the person who's going to be wrongfully accused. Then you're going to have the crime followed by the arrest. That's when our main characters finally enter the scene. And they start their initial investigation. Things don't add up. And all the while they're having their season-long will they, won't they moment of, are they going to end up together? I don't know. But we're going to hint at it this entire time. And then they're going to start the whole round of interrogations of different witnesses. And something is going to be brought to light that they missed at the beginning. Then they're going to find the right person. And then they're going to celebrate over drinks, and you're going to have that moment where you recognize there's something more going on here, and you just want one of them to say something to the other one before it's too late. But that's not going to happen until the season finale, when one of them either gets shot or hurt, and this happens a lot more frequently than you'd think it would. One of them's about to get married to somebody else. That happens a lot. Like, finally spill their guts, and you don't get the result or the answer until the next season. Because they got to have you watching next season, right? And then that whole season is either going to be the awkwardness of they're not sure how they feel, or they try to go on a date, but things are kind of weird, and you don't get the moment where they finally kiss for the very first time until that season's finale. I think I just described about 150 different television shows from 1983 on. So, I don't know, spoiler warning? Whatever detective show you're watching right now, that's pretty much how the season's going to end. Sorry. But here's the thing, like, even as somebody who doesn't necessarily watch those kinds of shows, there's still that same problem that exists in the type of entertainment that I consume more, probably than anybody else in this room. That being superhero movies and television. As all of you know, I am a giant nerd, really, but I love all things superheroes, but there is one element of superhero media that I'm frankly just over, and I'm ready for us to be done with. And yet every single movie, every single television show, they're going to have that moment where we get the origin story. And the reason I'm tired of it is because we know it, right? How many times do you have to see Uncle Ben shot before you get to the web swinging of Spider-Man? How many more different ways can we blow up Krypton? A couple of years ago, there was a show that was getting ready to hit TV called Gotham. It was billed as the story before the bat, which is terrible. But I remember being on social media, and there was a picture of Thomas and Martha Wayne in a behind-the-scenes photo, and one of the very first comments on there is, probably don't want to get too attached. And they didn't even make it halfway through the first episode. But here's the thing. The thing about the superhero origin story that drives me absolutely nuts, especially as somebody who reads comics, sometimes highlight just how lazy comic book creators can really be. Take, for example, the most well-known comic creator in probably all of human history, Stan Lee. Everybody raves about what a genius Stan Lee was. And I'm not trying to throw shade here, but Iron Man was a genius billionaire who had an accident and became Iron Man. The Hulk was a genius scientist who had an accident and became the Hulk. Doctor Strange was a genius surgeon who had an accident and became Doctor Strange. Spider-Man is a genius student who had an accidental spider bite and became Spider-Man. The Fantastic Four are 4 people led by a genius astrophysicist who has an accident, and they became the Fantastic Four. See what I mean? Again, love Stan Lee. Maybe think a little bit more. They can't all be geniuses, right? It's not the way it works. Sometimes we just don't need to go over the origin story. And the reason I think I have such a problem with that is because when you start telling me the same story over and over and over and over again, eventually my brain just shuts itself off, right? I'm not listening. I'm not paying attention any times. And I really want to get to the parts of the story that I haven't heard yet, right? I want to get to the parts where they're going into those villainous layers and they're taking down the bad guys, or we want to get to the part in the detective series where they get thrown a mystery that they can't figure out, because if you talk to any lifelong police detective, especially in large cities, if they've retired, there's always at least one case they never solved, and it bugs them to this day. I want to see that I want to see them wrestle with it for seasons long and still not know who did it. Right? I want something new. I want something fresh. I want stories that are there. I want to get to the part that it is. But if you keep telling me the same thing over and over again, by the time you get to the fresh stuff, I've tuned out. And we do that in so many other places in our lives, including in Scripture. There are some stories that are within the Bible that we have heard so many times that by the time somebody like me were to say it out loud, you've checked out, right? And I think that's even true when it comes to the origin story of Moses, right? When we left things off with last week, everything was kind of terrible, but we knew that the hero was finally coming. And so when we get to Moses, if I start talking about his origin story, you've checked out before I ever get him into the basket. Right? Many of you have had the flannel graph of that basket being placed in the Nile. You did the coloring book of Pharaoh's daughter fishing him out of the water and bringing him home. You watched the Adventures of Odyssey tapes of Moses killing that Egyptian. And you've seen the VeggieTales episode of the burning bush and God telling him what to do. And if you haven't, well, let me tell you, the book is better and you should probably read that. But we've seen that story all the way around. And so as we continue on this journey through Exodus, which I'm really proud of that particular pun. There you go. Some of you got it. I was waiting for a groan from a dad joke. All right. But as we continue on through this, we're not going to cover the origins of Moses because you've heard that already. And the thing of it is where we left things off last week, we need our hero getting to work. Because when we left things off last week, life for the Hebrew people had taken a dramatic and frankly terrible turn. If you recall from last week, we left things off with the Hebrew people being enslaved by the Egyptians. And they were enslaved for the sole crime of moving down there when Joseph brought the whole family to come and live with him. And then they had the audacity to have kids. Truly villainous behavior if there ever was one. And the Pharaoh of that time is so scared of these people that his only solution is to enslave them, and even go so far as to start saying, hey, if you see a male baby that belongs to the Hebrews, chuck it into the river. So we need our hero to get back to work. We need it to happen. We left things off last week with God hearing the cries for the release. He remembered the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and that other guy. And he began putting the wheels in motion for Moses to enter that picture. I told you last week I wasn't going to say his name anymore, so you're welcome. So while we're not going to go over chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Exodus, in case you're not familiar, really the only thing you need to know about Moses is that he was a Hebrew raised in the household of Pharaoh. He killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew slave and then fled. And then he has an encounter with God where God tells him, you're going to be the one to free my people and bring them into the promised land. Again, if you've never read Exodus 2, 3, and 4, by all means do so, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time in there. But God, in order to help Moses out with his duties here, God gives him certain miracles to do to prove that this is coming from God himself. And he actually gives Moses and his brother Aaron the words to say to Pharaoh, but he gives them kind of a strange warning. Exodus chapter 4, verse 21. It says, "And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all of the miracles I have put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go." It's interesting to me, and maybe to you, that God says, I will harden his heart, not Pharaoh's heart will be hardened. Like God is specifically saying, I'm going to be the one to harden his heart. Keep that in the back of your mind for a few minutes for me, please. Because this leads us to the passages that we are going to be covering today. And like a few weeks ago, it's going to sound like we're trying to cover way too much into 1 week, but again, just stick with me. We're really just kind of scratching. Right? So again, if you've never read 2, 3, and 4, read those, but then go on and continue on through our text today of Exodus 5 through 12. Just trust me. It's all going to be fine. Maybe. But go ahead and get turned to Exodus chapter 5, because chapter 5 is where everything kind of starts off. And it begins with the very first time that Moses and Aaron go in front of Pharaoh. And Moses asks Pharaoh what should be a fairly reasonable request, at least to Pharaoh's mind. Right? The request is not the full Charlton Heston, let my people go. Not yet. I should have covered that because it gives a much deeper effect and more gravitas. I wish I had Charlton Heston's voice. But Exodus 5, he goes in front of Pharaoh and he asks Pharaoh to allow the Hebrews to just take a few wilderness to have a feast in honor of their God. And the reason why I say that should be a fairly rational request for Pharaoh is that the Egyptians is very much a polytheistic culture, meaning that they believe in a whole lot of gods. And so the idea that a group of people under Egyptian rule want to go and celebrate their God, it should make all the sense in the world. But see, the thing about it is the Egyptians have reliant on the Hebrews to do all of their work for them. And so when Moses and Aaron make this request, Pharaoh doesn't allow that to happen. He says in Exodus chapter 5, verse 4, "But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens." That's a terrible thing to say, right? Get back to your burdens. But then Pharaoh himself is so annoyed that they would even make this request that he actually commands his people to stop supplying the Israelites with the straw that's needed in order to make the bricks that they're supposed to be making. He says, let the Israelites go and gather their own straw, but I still want them to hit their quota. I'm going to make it take 3 times longer for them to do it, but they still got to make the same amount of bricks every single day. He has just taken what is already a terrible job and made it worse. Seems to be a running theme so far in Egypt, doesn't it? Take something that's already terrible for the Hebrews, make it worse for them. Let's have some fun. And Moses doesn't really understand why this is going on. He doesn't get what the plan is here from God. And in Exodus chapter 6, verse 1, God actually tells him something important. It says, "But the Lord said to Moses, now you'll see what I will do with Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land." When Moses doesn't see the plan, when God does not, this is kind of a theme with God throughout Scripture. God tells somebody to do something, and he doesn't tell them how, or how it's going to go down, or what's going to happen. He just says, just go do it, trust me. And now we've gone to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, not only am I not letting you go, I'm going to make your work even harder. And God just says essentially to Moses here, it's about to get good. Because this is a key moment that's about to take place. the God of the Hebrews is about to prove himself in a massively significant way. Again, all of Egypt believes in different gods. And God is about to put himself on display. Chapter 7, verse 5. The Egyptians shall know I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them. A few minutes ago, I asked you to keep in the back of your mind, why would God say, I will harden Pharaoh's heart? And I think the easy part for us to say is this sounds like almost a monstrous moment from God, that he is going to be the one to harden his heart. But understand that what God's about to do, everybody in Egypt is going to see. Literally, everyone is going to see. And God is saying, I'm about to make myself known amongst these people. Because this is where the famous 10 plagues of Egypt kind of come into play. And you've probably had a viewpoint of the 10 plagues whenever you've heard about them. You've probably thought about them as one specific way. They're terrible things that happen in order that God could eventually free the Hebrews. Right? That's ultimately the way that I was taught them. But here's the thing. I think God was awful specific with the plagues that he chose. I think he was rather calculated in the plagues that he chose, and I think he did so for a very important reason. I say that because when we hit the first plague, God is about to demonstrate something hugely significant to him. He's about to show all of Egypt that the God of the Hebrews is the one true God. And so this first plague that hits all of Egypt is about to be the first, it's going to be an introduction like nobody's ever even thought of in all of Egypt. Because it says in Exodus chapter 7, verses 17 and 18, thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn to blood. That's so cool. The fish in the Nile shall die, the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking water from the Nile. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that for many of you it's been a little while since you learned about ancient Egypt in school. Because for some of you it's been a while since school. I love you. But one thing that you probably do remember about your studies of ancient Egypt in school is that the Nile itself was hugely important to every single Egyptian. In fact, the Nile itself is the source of a great deal of their economic stability. Fishermen would use the Nile to, fish. Feels like that should be obvious, right? But they would fish in order to feed their families as well as to fish to other people. It's how they brought home whatever money their family needed to survive on. Right? The Nile itself was a freshwater source, and so everybody would use that as sort of their drinking water. I don't know if you know this, water is important to you. Like you need it. And if you're sitting there thinking it's been a while since I just drank water, please do so. But not only that, but Egypt is one of the first cultures in history to ever use the process of irrigation in order to water their crops so that they could farm more effectively. Egypt is in a desert area, so the idea of irrigation would be hugely important if you're trying to grow crops. And so by God turning the Nile into blood, he has just dramatically affected everything in Egypt's economy. Every Egyptian is affected by this, but because of how important the Nile is to them, and because of how religious, polytheistic their ideology is, the Egyptians ascribed 3 different gods to the Nile. They showed the god, let me see if I can find it here real quick, sorry. They had Apis, the god of the Nile itself, Isis, the goddess of the Nile, and Khnum, the guardian of the Nile. And so with God turning the Nile into blood, he has not only hit the Egyptians where they lived, destroying their economy, at least for a temporary state, he is also showing them that the gods of the Nile are not more powerful than he is. I would think that if you're disrupting an entire economic system and you've just slapped 3 different gods in the face, that might be enough. But Pharaoh doesn't let them go. Again, God has hardened his heart. And so I guess we need another one. Exodus chapter 8, verses 2 and 4 says, "But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague your country with frogs." Maybe the cutest plague? "The Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and onto your bed and into your houses of your servants and your people and into your ovens and into your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and your people and all of your servants." Now, again, I like frogs. Frogs are cool. But if I were to pull the covers off my bed, getting ready to go into bed, and there's frogs in my bed, I got a problem with that. If I'm trying to fix food for my family and there's a frog in the bowl that I'm mixing, bread, I don't do the baking thing. Mandy does that. But if the frog's in my mixing bowl, I'm going to be mad. Right? I don't like frogs that much. They're not turtles. But more than that, in ancient Egypt, frogs were considered to be sacred. And they were considered to be sacred because of Hekwet, the frog goddess of fertility and birth. So now every home in Egypt is littered with frogs that they cannot kill because they're worried it might upset Hekwet and that she might cause either stillbirths or infertility. Fun. And when they finally do die off, it says in verses 13 and 14, the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. And they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. You thought it was bad when they were alive. Let's get the smell of a bunch of decomposing frogs up in the air. So we can safely assume that God has shown his superiority over Hekwet. And if it feels like a pattern is starting to develop here, well, it should. Because again, I believe that God was heavily intentional with the plagues that he chose to give here. Every single is God showing his authority over creation. It is not just God demonstrating his power for all of Egypt. He is also showing them their gods are nothing and have no authority over him. With the next plague, the gnats, which is probably my least favorite, is to show his superiority over Geb, the god of the earth. The gnats themselves are actually made from the sand that is around there. I don't know if you know. And so he's able to turn that sand into gnats to show that Geb ain't nothing. The flies, which is a contender for my least favorite as well, was to show his superiority over Eutychit, which is a really fun word. Maybe name your cat after that. He is known as the fly god, which to me sounds like a Jeff Goldblum movie, but cool. The next plague, the death of the cattle, God is showing that Apis and Hathor, the god and goddess of fertility that were depicted as cows themselves, can't touch him. The plague of boils was to show strength over Sekhmet, the goddess of healing and protection. The plague of hail was against Nut, the goddess of the sky, and Set, the god of storms. The plague of locusts that devoured all of the Egyptians' crops was against Nippar, the god of grain. And the plague of darkness was against Ra, the god of the sun. In each and every case, God demonstrates that these so-called gods have no authority over me. This is God flexing his power in a way that we have not seen thus in Scripture. Because he is not just attacking people's ideology, he is not just attacking their sinful behavior, he's attacking their strategies. An entire religious system is crumbling on itself. And that brings us to the final plague. The one that is undoubtedly the harshest of them all. And that's saying something, again, when you consider that The Egyptian economic system has been completely disrupted, that people's health and safety has been compromised, that their food supply has been endangered, that their livestock has been out. But there's still one more God to take down. Exodus chapter 11, verses 4 through 5 shows the final plague. It says, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl in mill, and all the firstborn of the cattle." Again, like every other plague, this is in challenge to one of the Egyptian gods. But this is also a personal attack. See, in Egyptian culture and in their religious system and ideology, Pharaoh himself was viewed as a god. And we've seen thus far that Pharaoh, dude's got himself an ego. As a reminder, Egypt itself is the superpower in the world right now. It is at an economic level that nobody else can even fathom. And so when you are the head of the most powerful nation in the world and your people worship and pray to you like you're a god, that's bound to go to your head. But as Pharaoh, his sole responsibility above everything else that he has is to keep his people safe. Every world leader, regardless as to what system of government they have, their sole responsibility is to keep their people safe. And so with God saying, I'm about to wipe out every firstborn in this entire nation, he is challenging Pharaoh, try and stop me. And so when midnight hits, a cry goes out in all of Egypt. And Egypt only, it doesn't really affect the Hebrews, but we'll talk about that next week. And it even hits Pharaoh himself. And so finally, after the entire country has been ravaged by 10 different terrible plagues, this one being the worst of them all, Pharaoh relents. It says in Exodus chapter 12, verses 31 and 32, it says, "Then he being Pharaoh, summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, 'Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go serve the Lord. As you've said, take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone.'" And you can almost hear the fear in his voice finally hit when he says, "And bless me also. Please tell your God to stop." He views the exodus of the Israelite people as a blessing for now. God has shown his superiority over every other Egyptian god that there could be, including Pharaoh himself. He has shown that none of them have any authority, and that the God of the Hebrews has ultimate authority over everything. You and I live in very strange times. I don't know how you feel about it, but to me, the world feels more divided than it's ever been before. At least in our own nation, we can say. It has probably not felt this divided since we were shooting at each other. And what feels like it's making the situation worse is that those who have been placed in positions of authority and those who are responsible for reporting on the givings of those people in authority seem to only fuel the division. We live in an age where what is true is up for debate. Where what happened, where we can look with our own eyes, can be bent to somebody else's benefit. We live in a world where right and wrong are speculated. And because of this, everything seems to have an air of uncertainty. We have a genuine uncertainty of where do we go from here, what's going to happen next, what does the future look like? And uncertainty will always breed fear. But can I remind you of something that you already know? Our hope is not found in this world. It never was. It's easy for us to get caught up in that. It's easy for that to happen, right? Because this is where our physical bodies are right now, right? Regardless as to what happens in the future, we still have to find some way to live through that until they're putting us into a box and laying us into the ground, right? We still have to wrestle with that. And so it's easy for us to get caught to try to make things better, that our hope has to be found in this place, that maybe this candidate is the one who will change everything. But that's not where our hope is. Our hope comes from the God who has repeatedly shown us that he has authority over absolutely everything, including the people that are in authority over us. That the power that those people claim is an illusion compared to his. And while he does call for us to submit to those governing authorities, there's a part of Romans chapter 13, verse 1 that we tend to overlook. It says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And instituted by God. So yes, that verse tells us, submit to your authorities, submit to the governing bodies ahead of you, but never, ever forget who has real authority. I get it. We can get so wrapped up in what's going to happen in the future. And as somebody who considers themselves to be an independent, I don't have a political sway. You can have your political opinions. That's cool. If you want to vote right, cool. If you want to vote left, cool. I'm an independent, right? So I kind of look at everybody. And so there's a part of me that, as we're getting ready for the 2028 elections, because yay, let's do that again. I'm paying attention to what both sides are doing, right? And this week I heard the funniest thing in the world to me. And I'll explain why it's funny in just a minute, right? I paid attention to an interview that was taking place with James Comey. If you don't know who he is, he's one of the top advisors to the Democratic Party, right? The scummiest of the scum. Some of you love the guy. That's fine. He looks an awful lot like Phil. But love you, Phil. But James Comey was being asked, hey, who in the Democratic Party do you think has a chance of beating the Republicans? Is it Kamala Harris? Is it Gavin Newsom? Sorry. And he said, no, I don't think either one of them have a plan. I think it's the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. That's my guy. I lived in Illinois for 6 JB. That ain't going to happen. If that's the best they got, they're in trouble. So we don't know what's going to happen. We have no idea what the future is going to hold for us. We don't know who's going to win. Can I be honest with you? It doesn't matter. And yet, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, I have conversations with Christians where that is the only thing they want to talk about. As if that is where the source of hope really comes from. Christians who are terrified about what's going to happen next. And again, I understand we have to live through it, but that's not where your hope is. Every side of the aisle claims to be the side that is more righteous than the other, and every side of the aisle does things that prove otherwise. They're all liars. So if you're placing your hope in the upcoming election, you're going to feel despair again, regardless of who wins. Whichever political party has the majority in the Senate or the House or whatever, who cares? They're going to do things, they're going to mess up a lot of things. It's what they do. Our hope is not found there. Our hope comes from the one who has actual authority, actual power, who has proven to the Egyptians, ain't none of the people that you put in authority anything compared to me. That is where our hope is. That is where our hope should always be. I know it's hard. I was able to get gas for $4.19 this week, just before it shot up to $5. I'm going to need gas again. I know it's hard. And we all got to find some way for our physical bodies to keep doing it, but our hope is not found in this world. Because the people who have authority over us have no real power compared to our God. The God who loves us so very much, who wants a relationship with us so very much, who wants to give us his hope so very much that he sends his Son to die on our behalf so that we could be reinstated to him. The worst thing that they can do to you is kill you. And I've told my wife this before. When my time comes, that I'm about to breathe my last, I hope I have the wherewithal to just say, finally. Because then I get to go home. Because this world ain't my home. And if you profess the name of Jesus Christ, this ain't your home either. So stop looking for your hope on this world. You're not going to find it. Our hope comes only from God. Because he is the one with ultimate authority over everything. Jesus would remind us of where our hope truly lies in Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, and we will close with it today. And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell.